What is up, everyone? I'm Rose and welcome back to my channel. In 2013, Ray Dalio released a 30-minute video called How the Economic Machine Works. And this video is a summary of that summary. Before we get started, have you subscribed to my channel? If not, what are you waiting for? My channel is all about investing for beginners, and you're gonna learn a ton about how to be smart with your money. So make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for new videos like this every week. Ray Dalio says that although the economy seems really complicated, it's actually very simple. How the economic machine works is a template that helps you understand the economy. And once you understand this template, you can apply it to any situation, any country, any moment in time to understand why economies behave the way they do. According to Ray Dalio, there are three main forces that drive the economy: productivity growth, the short-term debt cycle, and the long-term debt cycle. Over the long term, the economy grows as a result of productivity. When automobiles, the internet, all these new technologies came out, it increased the output or the productivity of each person so that the overall economy was more productive. So the economy works just like that. At the end of the day, the economy is driven by productivity. More productivity equals more economic growth. However, the economy isn't that simple because there are other factors in play, specifically credit. Credit is basically the ability to borrow money and spend more than you earn. And the availability of credit is a hugely important driver of the economy because it enables people to spend more. And more spending equals more economic activity, which equals more jobs, which equals more spending, and so on and so forth. Let's say you make, say, $70,000 a year, but you have a credit card with a $10,000 credit limit. That means you can spend $80,000 a year, even though you don't actually make $80,000. Without credit, the only way you could actually spend more than you make is by working harder to earn more and getting a raise, or in other words, increasing your productivity. This is true on a macro level as well. If businesses can borrow money in order to grow, for example, a cupcake shop that borrows money in order to open a second location, then they can create more jobs, which creates more income for people, which creates more spending, and so on and so forth. Get the picture? So credit helps the economy grow really fast, even if the level of productivity isn't necessarily rising. Most of the spending in the economy is done on credit, not on actual cash. Just to give you an idea, in Ray Dalio's video, he says that the US economy operates on $50 trillion of credit and only $3 trillion of actual cash. So you've got all this spending on credit, which enables the economy to grow faster than the productivity curve. And then what happens now is inflation. Inflation is when prices rise because demand is greater than supply. And the thing about inflation is that the government doesn't like it. Nobody likes inflation. So in order to keep inflation in check, the central bank raises interest rates. It's like if the interest rate on your credit card went up, you'd probably stop using your credit card. And you'd have to cut down on spending in order to service your higher monthly payments. So it's the same with the economy. When the central bank raises interest rates, that causes the economy to shrink instead of grow. On the flip side, if the economy is shrinking too much and it's on the brink of recession, the central bank can save the economy by cutting interest rates. This would make credit cheap again, and that would encourage spending and revive the economy once again. This dance between interest rates, the availability of credit, and economic growth is what Ray Dalio calls the short-term debt cycle. Interest rates have a huge impact on the availability of credit, and therefore on the economy. That's why if you follow the news at all, you'll often see headlines about the Fed, the nickname for the United States Central Bank, also known as the Federal Reserve. Investors and business people are obsessed with trying to figure out whether the Fed is gonna cut rates or raise rates, because it's that important for the economy. So, now you know that the economic machine is driven by three things: productivity, and the short-term debt cycle, and the long-term debt cycle. We've talked about the first two things, but what about the long-term debt cycle? With every new short-term debt cycle, the total debt level in the economy ends up higher than where it was in the previous short-term debt cycle. So you can imagine, over the decades, debt burdens tend to increase, not decrease. For example, when you first graduate college, you don't have a lot of income, so you probably don't have a lot of debt. But as you get promotions and you start making more money, you'll probably be able to buy a house, you'll buy a car, and you'll be able to take debt for these things because you have enough income to qualify for these loans. So, that's totally fine. You have a ton more debt than when you were younger, but your income is also a lot higher. So really, all in all, everything's fine. However, Ray Dalio's point is that there's always a reckoning day, and that's when the long-term debt cycle comes to a head. One day, the debt reaches a critical mass where your income no longer can sustain your debt. At that point, you have no choice but to cut back on spending. When this is happening on a macro level, in other words, a country level, then businesses cut back on spending, governments cut back on spending, and there's a serious drop in economic activity. The peak of the long-term debt cycle occurs after a series of many short-term debt cycles, when the debt burden becomes too high. And at that point, what Ray Dalio calls a deleveraging is necessary. In other words, when the debt burden has become too high and it has to come down. The end of a long-term debt cycle is a very risky time for the economy. And they're much trickier to navigate than short-term debt cycles, because at the end of a short-term debt cycle, a little bit of tweaking with interest rates usually does the trick. Lower rates to stimulate the economy, and boom, we're back off to the races. But with long-term debt cycles, interest rates are already really low. So the government can't cut rates anymore. As Ray Dalio explains, there's 4 ways the debt burden can come down. 1. People, businesses, and governments cut spending. 2. Debts are reduced through defaults and restructuring. 3. Wealth is redistributed from the haves to the have-nots. And 4. The central bank prints new money. The first 3 that I described, which is cutting spending and taxing the wealthy and restructuring debts through defaulting, these are all really harmful for the economy. However, the 4th method, where the central bank prints new money out of thin air, is the only deleveraging method that is actually stimulative to the economy. This is exactly what the US did during the Great Depression and again during the 2008 financial crisis. In 2008, the US Central Bank, or the Fed, printed $2 trillion of new money and used it to buy financial assets and government bonds. This helped increase the availability of credit. It also helped fund government stimulus programs and also unemployment handouts. So all of this really helped the US to get out of these crises and depressions. However, too much of a good thing can also be bad. Even though printing money can help a country get out of a financial crisis, it can be harmful if they print too much money too fast. And that's exactly what happened to Germany in the 1920s, when hyperinflation broke loose and people were like carting shopping carts of cash to go buy one piece of bread. So that's hyperinflation and it's not good. Basically, all 4 methods of deleveraging, whether it's cutting spending, defaulting and restructuring, taxing the wealthy, or printing money, all of these, if used in a balanced way, then debt burdens will go down without too much inflation or deflation. And that is what Ray Dalio calls a beautiful deleveraging. He explains that long-term debt cycles are normal and somewhat predictable, but the deleveraging that has to happen afterwards can be a tricky process. If policymakers don't handle it well, it could lead to a depression and even to a social revolution. In light of all the news headlines these days about a pending recession, I think it's especially important to understand what's going on in the economy right now. In a recent interview with Fox Business, Ray Dalio says that we're quite far into the short-term debt cycle and we're very late into the long-term debt cycle. In other words, we're due for a downturn. In closing, How the Economic Machine Works by Ray Dalio is a simple but powerful framework for understanding the economy in the past, present, and future. His framework of laying the short-term debt cycle over the long-term debt cycle and then laying those things on top of the productivity growth curve gives us a pretty good idea of where the economy is right now and where it's probably headed. If you want to learn more about the coming recession and different ways to prepare for it, and also about investing in general, make sure you also check out these 2 videos right here. And if you're new to the channel, I'd really love it if you subscribed. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments or message me on Instagram at investingwithrose. Always remember to go after your dreams unapologetically and to live life on your terms. Until next time, bye guys.